Hello, welcome back to my series on good books. This week I'm going to be talking about engines and mechanicking. I've got a whole pile of manuals that I could have gone and got out and piled up here, but I'm just going to talk about two books. So that these two books are very useful for giving you the information that you need to work things out for yourself. That's sometimes as useful or more useful than having a specific manual for a specific vehicle or machine or whatever it is you're trying to fix. So I've got two books here, Marine Diesel Engines by Nigel Calder, and as always I'll put details in the description of the name and the author of the books. And now this book, I don't know if it's still available. This book I got in a second-hand shop donkeys years ago. The Reluctant Motor Mechanic by John Fordham. What both of these books mean to me is that they've given me a really nice sort of foundation in the subject, and then that means that when I go on and read a manual, or if I try to fix something I don't have a manual for, these books I can always refer back to, and they'll go over again the concepts behind things, and once you can work out how something works, you've got a chance of working out how it doesn't work, if that makes sense. So it might seem a bit odd that I've not only got a book on marine diesel engines, but I'm recommending it over almost all my other books on engines when I don't have a marine diesel engine itself. But marine diesel engines, at least the ones in this book, are pretty much the same as old lorry engines and old tractor engines, and indeed old Land Rover engines. And those are the engines that I do have. And this is by far, by a mile, the best book that I've come across that gives you a grounding in how they work and then how to fix them, how to look after them as well. So like with many of the other books that I've been recommending, it's not just full of good information, it's full of accessible information. It's got whole chapters on troubleshooting. And it's what I like about the troubleshooting chapter is it's methodical, it's structured, and it says, right, so when you can't start something, it can be incredibly frustrating. But there's a reason why it doesn't start. And so chapter 4 here just takes you through calmly. Try this, try this, try this. And then eventually you'll find out why it's not starting. It's not starting because it's sulking. There's something wrong. And following this through, in the way he says it here, you can actually work that out. Now that's the sort of thing that doesn't come in manuals. So in a manual will describe a procedure, but you need to know whether or not that procedure is necessary before you get stuck into it. There's no point looking in the manual and working out how to change the injectors if you've got air in the system and it's just that's causing your problem, for instance. That's part of the value of this book. The other part of it is this guy worked on boats, on big marine engines for a long time, and he has the knowledge of what it is that makes them work and what it is that stops them working, and he goes on in here about the things that you need to concentrate on, and that's really useful. Because if you read a normal manual and it has all the service items that you're supposed to do each year, but it doesn't tell you the importance of those really, and that's what this book was really useful for me. In here, for instance, he drums on about the cleanliness of the fuel being absolutely vital, and that's, I think it's something like 80% of breakdowns are down to unclean fuel. Which is, that hadn't occurred to me before. There might be something as simple as that. So that's the part of the value of this, and it's, like I say, it's written in a very clear and easy to read way, which for something as technical as this, that's very valuable in itself. I mean, yeah, engines, mechanicking, can be a very dry subject, and that's a good readable guide to it. This book is very similar, written during an era where it's much more expected that if you had a car you would be maintaining it yourself, and you'd probably be doing it on something like a weekly or fortnightly basis. It's hard to even think about it nowadays, but back then, say in the 70s and 80s perhaps, I certainly remember as a kid, you know, my dad and my granddad had to do maintenance to their cars on a regular basis just to keep them running. That was expected. That's just what you had to do back then, and that's not really the case with modern machinery. I think we sometimes forget how evolved it is, in a sense, I suppose, the length of the service intervals and things like that with modern engines. And in here, so this one's about diesel engines, this one is mainly about petrol engines, and in here again there's whole chapters on why isn't it starting, and it goes through it carefully and calmly, which is what you need in that situation. I think at one point it does suggest beating it with a stick and then taking a step back and having another look at it. This is a cracking book then for understanding how petrol engines work. If you have, like me, a passing interest, you know, I'm not hugely interested in how engines work. I'm interested in getting them to work usually. It's what I can do with that engine that's normally more interesting to me than the engine itself. And that's kind of where this book excels at, telling you the important things. Great chapter in here that I just happened to have fallen upon on setting up a home workshop. And amazingly, for something written way back, when was this written? So this was written in 1979, and yet the setting up a workshop bit in an automotive sense is very relevant. Well, I found it relevant, but then I only have ancient vehicles. It's a really good read, is what I'm trying to say, if you want a grounding in how petrol engines work. And that doesn't just relate to cars. Obviously, to modern cars, it's not going to be that relevant because crikey, I wouldn't even know how to even look at a modern car. Fuel injectors, computers. Bleh. But for something like an old Land Rover or a Morris Minor or whatever cars are around, or indeed a motorbike, or a lawnmower or anything like that, any kind of petrol engine, this has got some really good information in here about how to go about fixing it and looking after it. So these are my two picks for diesel engines and for petrol engines. That'll do for now. See you on the next one. Cheers.